Hello. Welcome back to No Me Callo. I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin, and we're continuing with the May series, Things We All Do But No One Admits. And today we're stepping into one of the most common and also one of the most exhausting ones. Something you probably did yesterday or today or maybe even a few minutes ago. We're talking about that moment when your mind just won't shut off. When your body is tired, but your brain keeps going, it keeps thinking, it keeps building stories, it keeps searching for answers that may not even exist. So today's episode is called Overthinking Everything and Still Getting It Wrong. Because let's be honest, when was the last time you stayed up at night thinking way too much about something? Not normal thinking, I mean overthinking. Thinking until you're exhausted. Thinking until you've gone over the same thing 100 times. Thinking until you feel like you're analyzed every possible detail. Replaying moments, analyzing everything, rehearsing conversations in your head. What you said, what you didn't say, what you wish you had said. Like your mind is editing a movie. Changing scenes, testing different endings. Trying to find that exact moment where everything finally makes sense. As if you think about it enough, you'll eventually find the right answer. As if there's something you're missing and all you need is just a little more thinking to figure it all out. As if your mind doesn't have an off button. So you know what to do. Get comfortable, grab your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, or a cold beer, and get ready to chismear with me. And there's something interesting about overthinking, and it's that it never starts that big. It doesn't begin with something obvious. It doesn't start with something that clearly says this is important. Instead, it starts small, almost insignificant. A message that feels a little different, a shorter okay than usual, a slight change in someone's tone of voice, a look you didn't quite know how to read. Something so subtle that no one else would even notice, but you do. And in that moment, something switches on, like your mind suddenly says, wait, there's something here. And that's where it all begins. You start asking yourself, why did they say it like that? Do they always talk like this, or was it different today? Are they upset about something? Did I do something wrong? Am I overthinking this or not? And what was one small moment starts to grow. You think about it once, then again, and without realizing it, you're no longer thinking about what actually happened. You're building possibilities. You imagine what they meant. You imagine how they might have felt. You imagine what could happen next. So you create entire stories from just one small detail. And in that process, something shifts because you're no longer present. You're not in the real conversation anymore. You're not in the actual moment that's happening. You're in your head, trying to decode something that might not even be that complicated. Overthinking feels like you're doing something productive, like you're being aware, like you're paying attention, like you're protecting yourself. And it feels like control, like preparation, like you're one step ahead, avoiding mistakes, anticipating what's coming. But in reality, most of the time, you're not one step ahead. You're tangled, stuck in a loop of thoughts that doesn't lead you to answers. It only leads you to more questions. And the hardest part is this. The more you think, the more real it all feels. Even if nothing actually happened, even if you have no proof, even if it's just an interpretation, your mind fills in the gaps. It completes the story. It makes it feel real. And that's where overthinking stops being analysis and it starts becoming noise. So let's talk about something we all do, even if we don't admit it. Mental scenarios. And if you think about it, it's not something we consciously decide to do. It just happens. That moment when something occurs, a message, a conversation, a shift in tone, a weird silence, and your mind almost automatically goes into analysis mode. And it says something like, okay, let's figure out what's going on here. And without even realizing it, you've already started. For example, you're talking to someone and suddenly you start replaying what they might have meant. Maybe they said it like that because they were busy. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe that's just how they talk. Or you move into what could it mean? Are they upset? Did something change between us? Is it not the same anymore? And sometimes you even go straight to the worst case scenario because, of course, the mind always includes it. What if I did something wrong? What if this is starting to fade? What if they're pulling away? And then you start thinking about how they would respond. Okay, if they say this, I'll say that. If this happens, then I'll respond like this. I need to be ready. And finally, you imagine how they'll react. They'll probably reply like this. They're probably thinking that. And just like that, without even noticing it, you've created an entire conversation that never really actually happened. And what's interesting is that while all of this is happening, your body is still there. Your life is still happening, but you are not really there. You're somewhere else in another dimension, in a conversation that only exists in your head. And when you finally finish all those scenarios, something interesting happens. You're exhausted, mentally drained, like you've lived something intense, even though nothing really actually happened. But at the same time, there's something else. A strange kind of false sense of security, like your mind says, okay, I get it now. I know what's going on. I figured it out. I'm prepared. And then life happens. And the real answer does not look like any of those scenarios. Not one, not two, not three, not four, not five. It's something completely different and something your mind never even considered. And that's when you realize you can think as much as you want, but life will always find another way to surprise you. And this is where the most frustrating part of all of this comes in. It's not simply making a mistake, because making mistakes, well, that's part of life. That's something you kind of understand, more or less. What's really uncomfortable is what actually stays with you, is the moment after. That split second when something happens and your mind does this strange little shift, and you think, I already knew. I saw this coming. But here's the interesting part. You did see it coming, just not in one single way. You saw it coming in 1,000 different versions, in 1,000 different scenarios, in 1,000 possibilities your mind created. While trying to prepare for everything, you saw it coming as maybe this will happen, and also as, but maybe something else will happen. Or the worst possible version of this, and also as, or maybe it doesn't even mean anything. So when something finally happens, your brain doesn't go, okay, I didn't predict this. No, it does something much more subtle. It starts searching. It starts scanning through all those versions you created as if they were evidence. And it tries to find one that fits. Just one single version that allows it to say, see, I was right, even if that's not entirely true. And what's most interesting is that the mind doesn't do this to harm you. It's not trying to confuse you. It's not trying to sabotage you. It does it because it needs control. It needs to feel like it understood something, like it was prepared, like it wasn't completely taken by surprise. Because accepting that something simply happened without predicting it, without decoding it, without controlling it, can feel very uncomfortable. So your mind chooses something else. It chooses to reorganize what you thought. It chooses to say, at some point I knew this, even though in reality, all you knew was there was too many possibilities and none of them were guarantees. And that's where it gets interesting, because you start realizing something. It's not that your mind predicted the outcome. It's that your mind predicted everything. And when you predict everything, you can never be fully wrong, because there will always be a version of you that already thought of it. But at the same time, that also confuses you, because if everything was possible, then nothing was really clear. And if nothing was clear, what exactly did you actually see coming? And you're left there between those thoughts that collide. On one side, I already knew, and on the other side, but I didn't really know anything for sure. And that contradiction is exactly where overthinking lives. And we overthink because deep down, we want control. We don't always say it out loud like that, but that's what's underneath everything. We want to feel like we understand what's going to happen. We want to feel like we won't be caught off guard. We want to feel like we're prepared. We want to avoid pain, avoid rejection, avoid making mistakes. And so we start doing what we know how to do best. We think. We think more. We think better. We think again. We think from another angle. We think about what the other person meant. We think about what they didn't say. We think about what could happen. And without realizing it, we turn every situation into a problem to solve. Every message into a puzzle. Every silence into a signal. Every small detail into something that must mean something more. And then a very logical idea appears in the moment. If I analyze it enough, I'll make the right decision. If I think about it enough, I will make a mistake. If I check on it one more time, nothing will surprise me. And that idea feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels like you're doing the right thing. But it's also a very quiet trap, because the truth is, life does not work like that. No matter how much you think, you can't control every outcome. You can't anticipate every reaction. You can't know exactly how someone is going to respond. You can't predict what's happening in their mind. You can't read intentions with full certainty. And yet, we still try. We try over and over again again, as if maybe at some point, if we think a little bit more, if we analyze a little bit better, this time we'll finally reach full clarity. But it doesn't come. And what does come most of the time isn't clarity, it's exhaustion, it's confusion. It's more questions than the ones you started with. And that's where it stings a little because you realize something very uncomfortable. That thinking more doesn't always bring you closer to the truth. Sometimes it just pulls you further away from the moment. And while you're trying to figure everything out, life is simply happening without permission, without explanations, without giving you a preview. And you're there trying to prepare to something that in reality you can't fully control because you can't control every outcome. You can't anticipate every reaction. You can't read every mind. And no matter how much you try, there are things you only understand once they're already happening. And while you're trying to control what can't be controlled, something else is happening. Something you don't always notice at first because it's silent. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't hit you all at once. It doesn't announce itself. It simply happens. You're getting tired, not just physically, but in a deeper way. That kind of mental exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. That exhaustion from thinking too much, analyzing too much, feeling like it's never enough. You're starting to disconnect from what you feel, from what you wanted to say, and from what actually matters to you. Because you're so focused on understanding everything that you stop experiencing it as it is. And slowly you start living more in your head than in your life. And without realizing it, you start doubting yourself more, your decisions, your words, your perception. Before it was simpler. You felt something and you acted on it. But now it's not like that. Now you think about it, you review it, you question it, you analyze it from 5 different angles. And in that process, something starts to weaken. Because the more options you create in your mind, the harder it becomes to choose one. There's no longer one clear answer. There are versions, there are possibilities, there are what ifs, there are maybe I should. There are, but also, and then you decide, but you decide with noise, not with clarity, but with overthinking. And the more you analyze, the less you trust your intuition. That intuition that used to be faster, simpler, stronger. Now you interrupt it, you correct it, you question it, you ask it for proof, you ask it for explanations, and slowly it stops feeling like enough. It's like your mind is saying, don't trust what you feel too quickly. Let's think about it again. Let's check one more time. And just like that, what started as an attempt to protect yourself ends up pulling you away from yourself. Because now you don't even know if what you're feeling is intuition or just one of the many voices in your head. And the heaviest part of all of this is that from the outside, no one can see it. On the outside, you're still functioning, you're still responding, you're still living your life. But on the inside, you're in a constant conversation with yourself. And that conversation is not always kind. Sometimes it's demanding. Sometimes it's confusing. Sometimes it's exhausting. And the most ironic part is that it all started with something simple. I just want to do it right. But along the way, doing it right became doing it perfectly. And doing it perfectly became never making a mistake. And that's where overthinking starts to take its real cost, not in the decisions, but in you. So remember that message you read 20 times, and no, I'm not exaggerating. You open the chat, you scroll up, you read one line, you read it again, you change the tone in your head, you add intention to it, you remove intention from it, and then you start. Okay, why did they say it like that? Why didn't they just add an emoji? Why was that reply so short? Is this normal or is it weird? And suddenly you're searching for something. Like there's a hidden clue. Like inside those words, there's a second message, secret, invisible. And in the end, what happened? Nothing. No hidden meaning, no deeper message, no puzzle to solve, just a message. But your mind doesn't settle with that because you already invested too much, already built too much, already imagined too much. And there's another moment, that conversation you rehearsed 1,000 times, but not out loud, 1,000 times in your head, in the bathroom, in the car, before falling asleep, while showering, while walking, and you kept rehearsing it differently every time. A calm version, a firm version, an emotional version, an I don't care version, a perfect version where everything goes right. And you already knew exactly what you were going to say. You had the words ready. You had even prepared the other person's reaction. But when it happened in real life, it didn't even come close to what you imagined. You get stuck, you go blank, you say something different, or you say less than what you wanted to say, or simply it doesn't carry the same weight. It doesn't have the same control. It doesn't have the same structure. It doesn't have that perfect script your mind had created. And in that second, something feels strange because you're not just living in the conversation, you're comparing it to the version you invented. And that changes everything because now you're not responding to the moment, you're responding to your own expectation. And then there's that decision you analyze so much that it stopped being a decision and it became a mental project. You went over it from every possible angle. Pros, cons, what could go right, what could go wrong, what others might think, how you would feel after. And the more you thought about it, the heavier it became. It was no longer, what do I do? It became, what if I make the wrong choice? And then that's where the paralysis begins because you want to choose well, but you also want to avoid losing something. And you want to move forward, but without regret. And then something you don't expect happens. You don't decide from clarity. You decide from exhaustion, or you decide too late, or you decide without conviction, or you decide and keep thinking after deciding. And the most frustrating part of all is that even after thinking so much, it still didn't turn out the way you expected. And that's when your mind goes quiet for a second because it doesn't know what to do with that. Because if you thought so much, if you analyzed everything, if you try to predict it all, how is it possible that it still didn't go the way you imagined? And the uncomfortable answer is life was never following your script. So this episode is not here to tell you stop overthinking, because if I said that, it wouldn't be fair to you. It would be like asking you to turn off something that doesn't just turn off like that. Thinking is not your enemy. Thinking is part of how you learn to survive, to understand, to protect yourself. It's part of how you try to make sense of things, of what happens, of what doesn't happen, of what someone said, of what someone didn't say. And that is not something you can simply shut off. But there is something we can look at differently, and it's this. Not everything you're analyzing actually needs that much analysis, because all of us at some point fall into this. That moment when something small becomes huge in your mind. When a simple sentence turns into 10 different interpretations. When a silence feels like an entire story. And without realizing it, you start living more in your head than in your life. And then comes a question that stings a little. Am I actually understanding something, or am I just overthinking it? Because there is a difference. Understanding something gives you clarity. Overthinking gives you noise. And sometimes without noticing it, you get trapped in the noise, thinking it's clarity. But it's not. Not everything can be understood before it's lived. Not everything can be controlled. Not everything can be anticipated. Not everything can be predicted. In your mind, no matter how intelligent, how fast, how analytical it is, cannot carry all of that at once. And when it tries to, it doesn't protect you more. It drains you. It confuses you. It pulls you away from yourself because you start living more in scenarios than in reality, more in possibilities than in present, more in what could happen than what it's actually happening. And without realizing it, you miss the only thing that is real. And learning to accept that is not giving up. It's not stopping overthinking. It's not stopping caring. It's not stopping protecting yourself. It's something much harder and much more honest. It's trust, even without all the answers. It's loosening your grip a little, even when your mind wants to hold everything tightly. It's allowing things to be without fully solving them in your head first. And that doesn't make you weaker. It makes you freer because you're no longer fighting for every thought. No longer reviewing every detail 100 times. No longer searching for absolute certainty in something that was never meant to fully give it to you. And then you start noticing something different. That there are moments when life doesn't need to be understood, only lived. And as always, I want to recommend a book to you, and it's called How to Stop Overthinking Everything by Laia Sabaté, because it speaks exactly about that mental cycle where you read a message 10, 20 times, create scenarios in your head, and still end up more confused than clear. The author explores how overthinking is not really thinking better, but rather anxiety disguised as analysis, rereading conversations, searching for hidden meanings, rehearsing entire conversations in your mind, and trying to to control outcomes that simply cannot be controlled. The book explains how the mind tries to create safety through excessive thinking, but in reality, that only disconnects you from the present moment and from your intuition, and how often clarity doesn't always come from analyzing more, but from loosening your grip a little and allowing yourself to experience things without trying to fully solve them beforehand. So I recommend it. So if you ever stayed up at night replaying conversations in your head, if you try to decode something that maybe was never as complicated as your mind made it feel, if you feel that exhaustion of thinking too much and still not arriving at a clear answer, trust me, you are not the only person who does this. You are not the only one. You are not weird. You are not wrong. You're just being human. And being human sometimes means this: thinking too much, feeling too much, analyzing too much, and still not having all the answers. But maybe the answer is not always thinking more. Maybe it's trusting a little more, letting go a little more, allowing yourself not to have everything figured out right now, and slowly starting to come back to yourself. Because not everything that happens needs a perfect explanation. Sometimes it just needs to be lived. In the description of this episode, you'll find the Amazon link with the full list of books mentioned in No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, from the very first episode to today. And don't forget that every Friday there's a new episode waiting for you. The third episode of this series is called Strange Habits Nobody Admits Out Loud. Because let's be honest for a second, who hasn't checked if someone saw their story right after posting it? That moment where you go in, out, back in again, just to confirm if that specific person saw it or not. And you act like you don't care, but you do. Or tell me this: who hasn't stalked an entire profile and then pretended it was just curiosity? You went in for a second and suddenly you've seen pictures from 2019. You know who they dated, you know what they ate last Tuesday. You've basically built a full picture of their life. And you were just gonna do in a quick check-in. And it doesn't stop there. Writing a message and deleting it 3, 5, 10 times. Because the message was fine, but not quite good enough to send. And the classic, checking your phone every 2 minutes, even though you know there are no notifications. But you still unlock it, just in case, just out of habit, just because. So in the next episode, we're gonna talk about all of that. No filter, sin pelos en la lengua. Because the truth is, we all have these weird little habits that we do in silence, but that connect us more than we think. So if this is already making you say, okay, yeah, I did that or I do that, this episode is for you, so don't miss it. And before we close today's episode, I wanted to share something really special for this month. As part of No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, I'm doing a Mother's Day giveaway because this series has been about things we all feel, but don't always say out loud. And mothers, they carry so much of that silently every single day. So I wanted to create something that gives a little of that love back. We'll be giving away a self-care basket filled with thoughtful goodies, something created to be a small reminder for moms to pause, breathe, and take care of themselves too. Because even when they're working, even when they're taking care of the house, the kids, the family, the responsibilities, the invisible mental load, you still deserve moments that are just for you. Moments where you are not needed by everyone else, but cared for. So here's how you can enter the giveaway. I want you to listen to the episode I did with my mom. I took care of you with fear and love, and share 2 things you took away from it. You can send your answers in by emailing me at nomecallowithjessica@gmail.com, leaving a comment on the episode, or sharing them with me on social media. I'll be choosing one winner on May 10th by noon Central Time, and this giveaway is open to any mother, and yes, it's also open internationally. More than anything, this is not just about a basket. It's about reminding someone that takes care of someone else that she is not forgotten, that she matters too, and that she deserves softness too. So if this speaks to you, or if you know a mom who needs that reminder, I'd love for you to be a part of it. So good luck. You were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin. Until next time.